Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 2 of the video series where I critique and process your image. And in this episode, I'm processing an image from Raphael. And Raphael, thank you very much for sending in this great image. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole purpose of this series and all that stuff, waste time doing that. If you're interested in what this series is all about, please watch episode 1. I go into great detail what my goals are for this series. Now, as far as this image here, I find this quite challenging. Uh, the when Raphael shot this image, I think much like I would have shot it. There's a lot of sky. I like to get a lot of sky, especially when you have dramatic clouds. I like to have a lot of sky in my image. The problem when you get a lot of sky, it's hard really to show depth in the image. The best painters and the best photographers are those that could take that two-dimensional medium and give that third Z dimension to it. So it gives an illusion of some depth. Now, Ansel Adams was one of the greats at this. And if you look at some of Ansel Adams' images, he did it just a little differently. He tended not to give a lot of sky. He gave more foreground. So he would have the horizon much higher up in the image. And that gives a much better sense of scale and depth to the shot. And you can see that his images just have so much depth to them. And that is because he tended to do less sky and more foreground in his images. Now again, that's not saying that Raphael and I do it wrong. It's just, it's neat sometimes. It's really cool to have really interesting clouds in a shot. It's just more challenging to process. And one thing I should say is that I don't do these ahead of time. So you're seeing me do it right from scratch, and I might go down a rabbit hole and decide I made a mistake and I might have to back out of the rabbit hole now and then and do some steps over. But I'm going to do the best I can on this image. Now, as far as the composition, let's just talk about the camera settings first of all. This is a Fujifilm FX70 camera, and those of you that are not familiar with that camera, it has a fixed focal length, non-interchangeable 18.5 millimeter lens on it. Now, that of course is a little more limiting because, it's a lot more convenient for us to change lenses and get the exact focal length we want. And I have a confession to make. Being, a professional photographer, we're a little spoiled because we have a business. We could write off all these expenses. So we tend to, us professional photographers, tend to have a lot of lenses. And we get to write it off. And not only that, if we have significant others, we could say to our significant other, well, I need that expensive lens for my business. So we tend to have a lot more lenses. And I think that's where I made a mistake in that first video is I kind of assume I didn't really crop that image at all. And I don't crop a lot because I could really usually get the frame I want right in camera, but I have that luxury of having all these different lenses, and you might not have that luxury. So I'll try to keep that in mind and try to gear these critiques and processing videos with that in mind, that you may need to crop your image more than I would crop an image. Now, about the settings themselves, we're at f5. And usually in a landscape shot, you don't want to be open quite that much. You do want as much depth of field as possible, and you don't want to stop down all the way to like f22 because that will give you lens diffraction, and that will actually make your image not as sharp. Most lenses are at their sharpest when they're 2 to 4 stops up from wide open. This lens wide open is 2.8. So 2 stops from 2.8 is 5.6. So minimum, you should be at 5.6. Optimally, maybe around 8, f8. That's around 3 stops up from wide open. F11 is 4 stops. So maybe even an image like this where you really have a lot of a depth to it, you might want to even be at f11. But usually I shoot my landscapes around f8 all the time because most of my lenses are f2.8 lenses, so f8 works out well. Now, I get this question a lot, is where do you focus when you have a landscape? Well, there's kind of 3 rules of thought on this. One is called the hyperfocal distance. I'm not a big fan of it, not because I don't think it works. It works great, and it probably is the best way to do it. The reason why I'm not a big fan is two things. First of all, is you put this app, you get an app usually. There used to be charts, but nowadays you have apps on smartphones, and you would put in the focal length and the aperture you're shooting at. So if you're at 18.5 millimeters, you would dial that in. You're at an aperture of 5, and it will tell you how many, if you're in imperial units, how many feet away from the lens in inches you should uh, you should focus from. And they give very precise measurement. It might be like 3 feet 4 inches or something like that. Well, in this situation here, you'd need probably a tape measure, and then you'd have to have someone stand exactly that far away so you could achieve focus. Like there's nothing that far away that you could in the scene that you could focus on. So it's difficult. That's why I'm not a big fan of it. You'd really have to bring tape measures to really get it exactly right. And the other reason why I'm not a big fan of it is a lot of times in landscape shots, you have something in the landscape that is the main attraction to that landscape. And in that case, usually you would want to focus on that and disregard these hyperfocal distance. Now in this case, you could claim the lighthouse is, but the lighthouse is kind of a little bit too far away to focus on, in my opinion. You might want to focus on the sheep down here. That's maybe a little better. So my point is if in your landscape image, if you have something that's very prominent in the foreground or midground, I would say, focus on that and don't worry about hyperfocal distance. I think that main thing that people are going to look at should be as sharp as possible. The other rule of thumb, which I do sometimes and I would do in this shot, is you would focus a third up into the frame. So you would just look at the bottom of the frame and go about 1/3 of the way up into the image and you would focus there. The idea is that you would get X amount of real estate in front of the focus point in focus, and you would get 2x of real estate behind the focus point in focus. That's the way optics work. You usually get twice as much beyond the focus point in focus than you would have in front of the focus point. A lot of people hate this method. It works out well for me. So try it out. Maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it won't. So I would go up about a third up in the frame in this image, and I'd probably focus in here somewhere. So that's where I would focus, and I would have probably around a f8 to a f11 f-stop on this shot. All right, now finally we talked about I didn't really crop. In the last episode I did an image from Anthony, and after I did his video, he sent me his processing, and he actually processed it very similar to mine, except he cropped his to tighten it up a little bit, and actually it looked much better. And I gotta confess, I don't really crop much, and I mentioned because I have these lenses, I could usually frame it the way I need it framed, so I don't crop that much. And I'll try to keep this in mind when I go through these. Now, in this image, as I look at it, it's going to be hard to get a good crop out of this image, in my opinion. I'm a big proponent of the so-called compositional rules, and that you should try to adhere to a compositional rule. Now, in this case, because it was a fixed focal length, non-interchangeable lens, Raphael had, he was limited here. He couldn't really probably frame this perfectly. Now, when you open up the crop tool in Lightroom, you'll get the rule of thirds by default, usually when you just purchase Lightroom. And the idea of the rule of thirds is you would like interesting things along these lines, and you'd like the most interesting thing to be at a point of intersection if possible. Now in this case, there's really no way I could crop this without losing a lot of pixels to make this lighthouse be along this line here, which is where you'd prefer it, or at one of these points of intersection. So I don't think cropping this into a rule of thirds frame would work. We'd lose too much over here, and I think these cliffs out here are important. If you have the crop tool open, you hit the O key on your keyboard, you'll get different types of crop overlays. And in this one here, these are sometimes they call it the diamond overlay. And this again, you would like things that are interesting in these points of intersection. This overlay is more for when you have multiple things in the shot, um, groups of people and things like that. Hit the O key again and you'll get this triangle thing. And again, you want these intersection points is where you want interesting item placed. And if you have something like this where it could flip the other way, if you hold the shift key in, then hit the O key, you'll flip it. So we flipped it so it's diagonally the other way. You could hit the O key again, and now this is called the golden ratio. It's similar to the rule of thirds, except the rule of thirds was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. This is, I believe, 40, 20, 40. So it's a different ratio. And again, this nothing here I could do to make this look or cropped so it would fit this this compositional rule. Hit O key again, and this is called the golden spiral. Some people call it the Fibonacci spiral, and you'd want your point of interest right here at the uh, zenith of the spiral. Is that good, zenith? I don't know. But anyways, we'll hit Shift O again, and you could flip that around all different ways. And again, I really can't get that lighthouse anywhere near this spiral without considerable cropping. So I really don't want to do that. You hit the O key again, and we have just some templates for different paper sizes, 5x7, 4x5, and whatnot. Then we have this grid where you could straighten the image, and the image is very straight, so I don't have to worry about that. And then you hit the O key again, and we're back to the rule of thirds. So I really don't think there's any cropping I could do here that would improve the composition. This is one you'd, because it's a fixed focal length, non-interchangeable lens, you probably have to move around best you can. If your camera has, a lot of cameras have a rule of thirds overlay that you could turn on in the viewfinder, and I would encourage you to do that. My cameras that have that, I do have that on. That helps me compose the image and compose the scene. So um, definitely turn that on if possible. So I'm going to process this as is. We're going to start out in the basic panel. And again, now I want to add some depth as much as possible to it. So I want to make the sky a little more dramatic. So I'm going to bring highlights down, and it will just add a little drama to the sky. Now the shadows are very dark, so I'm going to have to open shadows way up like that. Now, as I usually do, I don't do much with whites and blacks yet. I don't Exposure was fine, so I don't have to mess around with the exposure or the contrast slider I don't use. I'm not going to do anything with white balance. I think I like the white balance the way it is. I am going to add a little vibrance, um, right around 9, I guess, and a little bit of saturation, 9 too. I'm going to jump down to the tone curve. We're going to look at medium contrast, and then I'm going to look at strong contrast. I like strong contrast. I'm going to leave it on medium contrast because I am probably going to use that On1 plugin that has the dynamic contrast later, so I'll do that. Let's do the white and black point now. I'm going to hold the shift key in and double click on the word whites to uh, do a white point. I kind of like that. We're going to hold the shift key and double click on the word blacks to do the black point, and that's okay. All right, so far so good. Now it is the sun's over here, so we do have a lot of shadow on these sides of this these grasses in here, and I think I just want to brighten that up just a little bit. Um, I just don't want it too dark down in here. Um, I just want to, let's see. Let me double click this. Let me turn up a little exposure, and we're just gonna brighten up these darker sides of the. If the color or the shading was totally like different from this group of grasses to that group of grasses, you could do individual brushes, but I think one brush will be fine. So I just want to brighten those up a little bit. Um, Oops, didn't want to do that. You could hold the Alt or Option key in. Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac, and you'll turn on the eraser function. So if you made a mistake anywhere, you could come in and zap that away. I'm going to have featherings up. Oh no, there. Put feathering up there. There we go. That'll look a little better. Um, so we're going to just brighten these up real quick. I just prefer. You'll see when I'm done. It might look kind of silly now, but I think it'll work out okay. And again, this might be a rabbit hole I'm going down that I might have to fix later. All right, I think that's good right there. So we're done with the brush. Um, okay, we're going to jump down to the HSL. Oh, one thing I should add here, because this was a Fujifilm camera, the lens correction is already built in. It's applied. So most mirrorless cameras, Micro Four Third cameras, will have a built-in lens profile that Lightroom will automatically apply. So that's why you didn't see me jump down here and enable any lens profile corrections right away. Okay. So we're going to go to the HSL tab. I'm going to go saturation, and I'm going to bring yellow up and green up, make it more saturated. I'm going to go to luminance, and I'm going to bring yellow and make yellow a little brighter. So that adds a little more depth to the grass. So we have darker green patches and these brighter green patches, and that just adds a little more variance to it where it was all kind of solid green before. And these areas that I brightened up add a little more tonal variety to the grass area here. The before the, if I go to the before, well, it's pretty dark, but it's more flat. And if my whole idea of the processing for the grasses down here was just to give a little more variation, a little more tonal variation. It adds a little more interest to it. I do like the lines. One nice um, compositional thing that you would look for when you're framing a shot is you like to have things coming out of the corners going up through the image. These are called diagonals, and we have this nice diagonal coming through. That helps lead the viewer's eyes through the image. These are leading lines, so we're leading us through the image to the lighthouse. So that's very, very nicely done by Raphael. All right, so I think I'm done with that HSL. I'm not going to do anything blues with the sky or anything like that. Now, again, as far as noise, this is borderline. It's ISO 400. I typically probably would do this in denoise. It's kind of borderline though, but I do take sharpening all the way down as I normally do. And then let's see if we could really get rid of this noise effectively with Lightroom. Now, the whole idea when you're doing sharpening and noise reduction, it's kind of a trade-off. You don't want to lose detail when you obliterate the noise, and you don't want to increase sharpening so much that you're actually enhancing the noise. So it's kind of a trade-off here. Um, I think I'm going to leave it at that and avoid sending it over to Topaz Denoise, and I think that's okay. There's nothing incredibly detailed in the image that I have to worry about. Um, so we'll leave it at that. And I think at this point, really, I am ready to send it over to Topaz Denoise. So I'm just going to right-click on the image, or I'm sorry, not Topaz Denoise, to On1 Effects. So I'm going to send it over to On1 Effects. Now again, On1 Effects, they have new version out now. They have On1 Raw, which will work on RAW files. Haven't used it much, but I will be using that and doing video series on that in the future. But right now, I'm still using the older version with the On1 Effects, and it doesn't work on RAW files. And so it converts it to a PSD file. So we're going to click Edit. So Lightroom will now create a PSD file from this RAW file. You can see it here. And then it will load it into and open On1 Effects. Now, again, I probably do things. We're going to do a smart photo. I explained this in the last video, what that's all about. All right. Now, my whole idea, then you always got to remember what your goal was going in here, is I want to add depth. I want to add really some depth to the image and give it the illusion that we have that Z dimension, that people could really look back into the image. And the way you would achieve that usually is with tonal variations. Different brightness values usually will give you some depth. So usually when you add this dynamic contrast thing, it automatically kind of gives you some depth to the image. Now, it did a nice job on the sky, but I think it just overdid the foreground a little bit. So what you could do is if you click right here, we get a mask, and we could actually paint out the adjustment in certain parts of the image. And you could paint it out in varying degrees. I could paint it out 100% or in maybe only 50 degrees. So only half of the effect will be applied to the grass, and 100% of the effect will be applied to the sky. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to change the opacity to, I'm going to try 20. No, we'll try 30. All right, so 30 for the opacity. No, I think I was right the first time. So the more I'm thinking of it, I'm going to go to 50. All right, and we're in paint out mode, so I'm going to be painting out 50% of the effect from the grass. So it's not as crispy looking, if that made any sense whatsoever. That's a term I made up. Okay, so it looks a little better to me. So if we turn off the effect there, turn it on, and you can see it is pretty dramatic on the sky, but it's not so dramatic on the grass that it looks like overly sharpened. All right, so we added a little bit of depth. I'm still not totally satisfied. We could try some things. There is a tone enhancer, and as soon as I click on this, it's going to automatically do an automatic tone adjustment, which usually I don't like. And I don't like it. I think it made it too dark. And you could just turn it off by clicking that auto thing there. See, I don't really know when to start. We got the image is very challenging. That's part of the reason why I chose to do it, is because it has such an expansive sky that is such a different tonal and color value compared to the rest of the image, the foreground and that. So it's really difficult. It's like you have to do one specific adjustment for the foreground and midground and a totally different type of adjustment for the background. And that could be pretty challenging. As you can see, I'm having a hard time here. So I think I was going to skip the tone enhancer. What I do want to do is I think I want to enhance the blue of this water here. So we're going to add a filter. We're going to go to a color enhancer. And that does an automatic adjustment also as soon as you open it. And I don't like that. It made it too warm to me. To me, this is more of a fall shot, maybe spring shot. It's a little cooler looking. That's the look I'm going for, at least. So what we're going to do is we're not going to do that auto adjustment, but we're going to go down here where it says color range, and I'm going to go to blues. Now, I'm going to, it's going to affect the whole image, but in a minute I'm just going to mask it out so it only does the water. But I'm going to turn saturation way up, and I'm going to turn the brightness down a little bit. That might be a little too much. About like that. So if I turn that off, you can see it's, just look at the water. That's all I'm really concerned about. Okay, so now I'm going to get this mask. I'm going to invert the mask. When I invert the mask, it turns off the adjustment. It gives me a black mask. And now I'm going to paint in the adjustment on the water, except we're going to get a smaller brush. So I'm painting in the adjustment. I want opacity at 100. And we're going to paint it in on this water here. So it's more of a subtle, but it helps add some depth to the image. And it's a little more challenging too when you have fog. A lot of people are big fans of fog. I'm not a fan because I have a hard time processing it. I just have a hard time making it look real, generally. And that's another reason why I probably chose this image, because I like challenges. So, okay, so we painted in that kind of, we made the water just a little bluer. So off on, off on. It bled up into the sky just a little bit. So I could now paint out. I think we'll get a less feathered brush. And if you have a straight line, if you click once in one far side, clicked once, go to the other far side, hold the shift key in and click again, and you'll actually draw a line. So I painted out a line right there. Okay, that looks better. All right, so that added a little more depth that way. It's still not where I want it. I'm going to try the vignette now. I almost always add vignettes to my images. The vignette helps draw the viewer's attention towards the middle of the image. And so you want to, it kind of just darkens the outsides. Ansel Adams kind of made this famous. His last thing he would do in the darkroom is he would burn the corners, he called it. And burning the corners, it just helps bring the viewer's attention in. Now, in doing that, I like the strong vignette generally down here and over here, but this cloud is too dark. So we're going to get this mask again. I'm going to paint out, and I'm going to paint out at maybe 30%. And we're going to get a fully feathered brush. And you can see if I just hover over these words, my cursor turns into a horizontal like arrow, double arrow. And that's called a scrubby slider. So I could just click with the left mouse button and do the adjustment very quickly that way. So we're going to get a bigger brush, hit the right bracket key, and we're just going to, let's say, click once right there. That's better right there. Maybe even over here. Yeah, that's better. So that isn't as dark. Just one little click did it. Maybe I could come up in here even, get a smaller one. No, didn't like that. You could hit Command Z for zebra on your keyboard, and you'll back out of that. We could bring the opacity down even a little more. And then try that click. That's all right. Okay, right there. All right, we're getting there. I'm still not 100% satisfied with this. What we're going to do, I'm going to try adding dynamic contrast again. Doesn't mean you can't do it twice. Now, I love what it did with the sky now. It seems to be giving more depth. I actually like what it did to the lighthouse itself. Again, the foreground is much too much. I do like what it did with the water, though, and back in here. So we're going to paint it out of the grass area. So we're going to get a feathering of about 50, an opacity of 100, and I'm going to paint it completely out of the grasses here. And I'm sure I'm missing spots, but I'm going to show you how you could look at this mask in a minute. Now, over here below the image, you'll see there's a little rectangle with a circle in it. If you click on that, that'll show you where you painted, an overlay of where you painted. So we want to get rid of it there and there. Now I bled way up into the water up here, so we're going to paint it in, and we're going to take the feathering down, and we're going to get a smaller brush, hitting the left bracket key, and we'll take it out of that house too. We'll take it out of this water in those. I don't know. Let's see, we'll paint it back out. Sometimes I get a little too overly fussy. A lot of tough people don't even notice this stuff, and you wasted all this time on it. Okay, turn off the overlay. There is before and after for that one adjustment. If we turn the preview off, there's where we came into On1 from Lightroom. That's what we started with. This is with our On1 adjustments. My vignette's just a little heavy the more I'm looking at it, so I'm going to come here to the size. I'm just going to pull it back just a touch with the size. Turn everything back on. I'd say that's it. I am done. So I'm going to click apply. Now, again, reason why I have problems with the misty, foggy shots, it subdues the colors a lot. And actually, my style is like, I like a lot of color. So that is difficult for me. So I did my best to try to add some depth to the image. And to get tonal variations along the grasses here. So I'm going to go back to the original image, and if we go to the history, and I go, now if I go right where we imported it, you can see it's pretty dark. But let's go right after we did the black clipping, and there's pretty much like Lightroom without those brush strokes, so this was more homogeneous down here. And what I tried to do is just make it a little more interesting with these tonal variations and add more depth to the sky. So the whole idea is we're trying to give that Z dimension to the image. So that's it. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not 100% satisfied with the processing I did on this image, and I what I often do, and what I mentioned to some comments before, because the image I did in episode 1 was definitely oversaturated, is your eyes. You'll find when you're in front of your computer, especially I have this big iMac I work on. It's just like right in front of my face, and your eyes tend to get burnt out from the color. They get numb to the color. And what you would do is you should process your image, and then you should walk away from your computer for at least a half hour, preferably an entire day, 24 hours. Come back, and your mistakes will really jump out at you when you come back. Then you could readjust where needed, and then share your image with the world. So in this case here, not 100% satisfied. I'm actually a little disappointed in what I did here. Um, so there is like a lot of times too. See this cloud here? It almost looks like it almost looks like it's like a sensor spot or some dirt on the lens. So you might want to just try to get rid of something like that too. Just you don't want anyone's oops. You don't want anyone's attention taken to any specific point where you don't expect them to be looking. We don't expect someone to look at that spot of that cloud. We want them to look at kind of the leading lines leading us up towards the lighthouse. And again, I think this would have been more impactful if we could have had this lighthouse somewhere more towards a rule of third line. I think that would have helped. The leading lines would have been more impactful in that instance. So I hope that made sense. Thank you, Raphael, for sending me in this great image. I wish I was there. That looked like a great scene to shoot. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.